This is microeconomics, and we're going to be talking about the costs of production in Chapter 13. This is a new unit in which we're going to be talking about different types of market structures. Perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly. And before we talk about those different types of market structures, though, we're going to just lay down a foundation in terms of definitions on costs, and we're going to look at typical cost curves for a typical firm, and then as we go through the next few chapters, we'll look at each market structure, separate market structure individually. All right, we've got a Coca-Cola plant here in town, and there are several others throughout the country. If you go to visit the one in Atlanta, Georgia, the part that they allow you to walk through, well, actually that's a museum there, it kind of looks like this. It's nice and pretty, and there's lots of colors, and you can see the lights there, and it's set up really nice. Their tour guide tells you about the production process, and at the end you get to taste all sorts of different Coca-Cola products, and it's organized by country, and so it's neat to see all the different drinks that they have. But if you were to tour the actual manufacturing part, it's not as pretty. It's actually really, really loud and really, really hot, and you can see all of the huge machinery there, lots of conveyor belts, lots of automated machinery, amazing technology that we've imported from different countries. Now this part kind of looks similar to the one that was on display on the first slide, where they put all the bottles on there at first, and whatever flavor they're working on, when they press start on the machine, that they can save time and go ahead and quickly fill up and cap all of those bottles of that particular flavor. They don't want to have any downtime unless they're cleaning the machine or switching out flavors. As long as the machine's running, they want to have those bottles in place so they're not wasting any time. You can see these Coke bottles are being filled up. Coca-Cola, as you might know, also produces vitamin water, so that's a separate product, and they have to, again, do one flavor at a time, switch out the flavor one at a time, so whenever they're running the machine, they're doing as much as they can, as much production as they can while that machine's running. There's also a separate section for Capri Suns. Now this picture I found off the internet, and somebody's made a folder out of Capri Suns, but it kind of looks like this when the machine is pulling out the rolls of Capri Suns before they've filled each one up with the juice inside. So it's really neat. It looks like you're looking through an oven. So there's on top of the machine, these rolls of just the wrapper are getting rolled out and gets cut up, and all of this is automated. Nobody's doing it. The machine's doing it. And so you've got this single strip of Capri Suns getting filled up inside this little area where you can look in, and it just gets injected in there, and it's like two mechanical arms just come and smash it, and you've got a single pouch of Capri Sun ready to go. And it just gets spit out on the conveyor belt, and all the person has to do that's working on that line is just collect those and put them in the big box that you might buy from Walmart or Sam's. So it's really amazing the machinery and technology that our manufacturing firms utilize to produce these products that we buy at the store. Not only are they thinking about revenue, so the price of their product times the quantity of products that are sold, they also have to think about the costs of maintaining all of that equipment, of paying their employees, and just keeping up those factories and plants. So again, revenue is the term that we use for the money that you make after you take into account costs, total costs. So total revenue minus total costs, profit is the term that we use for when we have taken into account costs. Your author points out that costs aren't only what we need to pay for all of that machinery, equipment, labor, supplies. It's also opportunity costs. And you'll recall from the first chapter, that's what you give up to get something else. And that's what we need to think about when we're talking about implicit costs, down at the bottom of this slide. Implicit costs are things that we're not writing a check for. We're not actually paying, or we're not actually paying online. This is what we have given up to maybe start our own firm. So think of all those costs with that machinery that I've just shown you. So the rental costs of the refrigerators or the payroll costs. Those are actual things that we are paying someone, writing a check for, paying online. Those are considered explicit costs. Implicit costs, like I said, deal with opportunity costs. If you were to start your own business, you might be putting some of your own financial capital into starting up this firm. Now, if you hadn't started this firm, you could have been working for someone else. That money would have been in the bank. You could have invested it and earned some interest off of there. So that's an example of an implicit cost. What else could you have been doing with your money if you hadn't started your own firm? You could have been investing it somewhere. You could have been earning interest. Also, you could have been working for someone else and earning a salary working for someone else. So if you could have worked for $40,000 a year, that salary, that lost salary that you are giving up because now you are starting your own company, again, because you can't be in two places at once, is considered an implicit cost. So, of course, you're not going to be writing a check out to anybody for your foregone salary that you could have earned, but it is a cost, an implicit cost, as an economist would say. And these implicit costs are not going to be shown up anywhere on any of the income statements or balance sheets that you're going to have an accountant prepare, because they weren't actually incurred, but an actual expense that you actually had to pay out, but was something that you gave up. So economic profit does take into account both explicit and implicit costs. Accounting profit only takes into account explicit costs. And I'm going to switch over here to page 262 in your book. There's just a little example with Farmer McDonald. Okay, gives banjo lessons for $20 an hour. But one day he decides to spend 10 hours planting $100 worth of seeds. Remember, this is an explicit cost. He's actually going to go to a feed store and pay $100 of seeds to the cashier before he can bring those home. What opportunity cost has he incurred? Right. Well, if he's spending his time farming and planting, he can't give banjo lessons. So that's his opportunity cost of farming, giving banjo lessons and earning $20 an hour. Again, he can't be in two places at once. So if he is spending 10 hours planting $100 worth of seeds, what is he giving up? 10 hours that he could have been, assuming he had the demand, and the students giving banjo lessons and earning $200. So in this case, accounting profit, remember profit is revenue minus total costs. So accounting revenue only takes into account explicit costs. So he earned $200 worth of crops, that's the revenue, minus the explicit costs, which is be 100. So the accounting profit would only be 100. Now, the economic profit, as you'll recall, does take into account implicit and explicit costs. So economic profit is equal to revenue minus explicit and implicit costs. So here's the revenue minus the explicit costs minus the implicit costs. So that's $20 an hour at 10 hours he's spending out on the farm. So that's 200 minus 100 minus 200, and Economic loss would be $100, negative $100 for economic profit. It's just a graphical representation of what we're talking about with economic versus accounting profit. So those are just a few definitions to keep in mind. Some other things that we need to talk about include the production function and the marginal product. All right, so businesses, corporations, firms, private firms, they all need to make choices about their inputs that are needed to make outputs, and they have to think of things like, how many people do I need to hire? And this production function kind of gives us insight into that type of question. All right, the production function is just a graph that shows the quantity of inputs that you have, for example, labor, and how many products you're able to make, your output. And it actually gets flatter as the production rises, as you make more and more items, because marginal product, the definition of it is how many more items are you going to make per additional worker that you hire, actually declines. This marginal product actually declines as you make more and more items. And because of this, your costs are going to go up as you make, at some point, as you make more and more items. At some point. Now, you may experience some efficiency at first, but then costs are going to go up with labor more and more. So here's an example with Caroline's Cookie Factory. You can see that she's starting off with just one person, and then that one worker can make 50 cookies an hour. If she adds a second worker, both of them together can make 90 cookies an hour. And so if you think of the marginal product of labor, how many cookies did that second person bring to the table, so to say? Well, we were able to make 40 more cookies than before, so the marginal product of labor for that second person is 40 cookies. If we added a third person, all three of them together can make a total of 120. But if you look at the marginal benefit of hiring that third person, that third worker, it was, you do 120 minus 90, 30 cookies. Now you can see what's going on with our marginal product of labor. It's going down. There are diminishing marginal returns, and I usually have an example with students in the class. If I say that their final product is a piece of paper folded twice with a staple in it, I give them one table, one stapler, and everybody has to crowd around that table and use that one stapler. I might see some gains when I start adding workers to the made-up firm that we have here in class, but after some point, you'll see that my volunteers will start making comments like, well, it's getting really crowded, and can we have another stapler? And there's less and less organization in terms of who should fold, who should use the stapler. It just starts getting crowded. And so why do we see these diminishing marginal returns when we're talking about the marginal product of labor? It's because in the short run, in economics, we define the short run as any period of time in which we have some fixed resource. We're constrained by at least one variable. And in the example in the classroom, it's one stapler. In real life, it could be our one copy machine that we have to run our business. It could be the 5 machines that we have right now. Next year, could we buy another machine? Sure. Next year, could we expand our factory and buy the lot next to us and maybe remodel and have a bigger factory? Sure. 5, 10 years down the road, of course we can expand. But today, this is what we have right now. So what we're talking about with the short run is today we're constrained by at least one variable, for example, equipment, and that's the best we can do right now. And if we're constrained by something, we're going to, at some point, start to see diminishing marginal returns. Okay, so few slides back on 8, remember a production function is the relationship between inputs and output. So in this case, before I go to the next slide, that production function shows inputs, which is our number of workers, that's going to be on the horizontal axis, and our output, number of cookies, total number of cookies that we've made with all of our workers. Okay, so you can see that it goes up to 50, then 90, then 120, 140, 150, 155, and it's always increasing, but the biggest increases we see with these first few workers. And those, it's still increasing, but at a much slower rate when we get to the 4th, 5th, 6th worker. Like, for example, our 6th worker only brings 5 additional units, or 5 more cookies in this case. And this production function just shows and illustrates these diminishing marginal returns when we keep adding more and more workers, and the total number of cookies still increases, but increases at a slower rate. Panel B, the figure 2 shows our total cost curve. Okay, your author says that these are like two sides of the same coin because you have these diminishing marginal returns. You're constrained by maybe a piece of equipment or some bottleneck in your production process. We're going to see costs start to go up if we keep hiring more and more people and try to keep making more and more cookies and it starts to get crowded and we have too many cooks in the kitchen, so to say. All right, so those slides deal with the production function and the diminishing marginal returns of marginal product. Okay, these next few slides talk about different types of costs. Now you might remember we just talked about explicit and implicit costs. Remember, explicit costs you're actually writing a check for. You're paying somebody for an actual, maybe some supplies or machinery. So all of these costs now that we're talking about here, fixed costs and variable costs, these are explicit costs. So think of explicit costs as the big category, and these are subcategories under explicit costs. Also, remember that fixed costs plus variable costs equals total costs. Way back on the first slide, or slide number 2 after the cover slide, you'll remember that profit equals total revenue minus total cost. So total cost is equal to these first two things on this slide, fixed and variable costs. All right, so you're going to have to remember that fixed costs, yes, they're explicit. We're actually paying somebody for these types of costs, do not vary with the quantity of output produced. So that means we could make 0 cookies, or we could make 1,000 cookies. We're still going to have to pay the same amount for rent, for insurance. Those things, it doesn't matter how many cookies you make. It's just a fixed cost. If we have rented the refrigerators or we are leasing some equipment, that's probably going to be split up into 12 equal monthly payments, and that's a fixed cost. We could be closed for a month, not make anything, and we still have to pay rent. Variable costs. Okay, these vary with the quantity of output produced. So if we are making more and more cookies, obviously we're going to need more ingredients. We're going to need more supplies. If you're going to be hiring more and more people, additional people, and paying them per hour of work, then that would be a variable cost as well. All right, just remember that we're going to need to calculate average costs. And to find the average cost of something, you just find that regular cost. For example, if we're looking for average fixed costs, you just find regular fixed costs, and then you divide by how many items you've made, the quantity of output. Same thing with variable costs. Okay, where are we looking at average costs? We're trying to look at how much it costs to make a typical one of our items, whether it's a cookie or a t-shirt. That's what we're looking for. Here are some examples in Table 2. Remember, total cost is equal to fixed and variable cost. So, for example, let's look at 4 cups of coffee. The total cost, $5.40, is equal to 3 plus $2.40. All right, if I gave you a chart with one out of these 3 columns, fixed cost, variable cost, and total cost, if one of these 3 columns were not filled out, you could easily fill it right back in. At least if you have at least 2 out of these 3 pieces of data. All right, if you've got those 3 columns figured out, then you can figure out average costs. Okay, I'm not going to give you this formula on the test, but all you need to know, if we're looking for average fixed cost, go to regular fixed cost and then divide by the quantity of cups of coffee per hour in this example. So let's see, at 2 cups of coffee, where did they get that $1.50? Okay, for average fixed cost, you find regular fixed cost is $3. Divided by 2 cups of coffee, that's how they got the $1.50. For average variable costs, you find regular variable costs and then you divide by quantity. So, for example, at 4 cups of coffee, what's the average variable cost of the 4th cup of coffee? So we're going to find the variable cost at 4 cups of coffee, that's $2.40 when we're making 4 cups of coffee, divided by 4. So $2.40 divided by 4 is equal to that 60 cents. Same thing with average total cost. You find regular total cost divided by quantity. For marginal cost, this one's a little bit different. You're not. You're looking for the definition or the formula for marginal cost is the change in total cost divided by the change in total output. So here you're just looking at the difference. Go to your total cost column and then just find the difference from the 2. So where did they get that first 30 cents? The $3.30 minus 3. Where did they get the 50 cents? That's the marginal cost of making the 2nd cup of coffee. They did $3.80 minus $3.50. And then so on and so forth to get that whole column. So make sure you know these formulas and you're able to fill out a chart like this. All right, if we're always going to have fixed costs, and they're always the same, that's why we've got 3 going all the way down. Variable costs, things like electricity, hourly wages for our workers, if we're going to be hiring more and more, then that's always going to be increasing. So it makes sense that total cost is always going to be increasing. So here's our total cost curve. You can see that it is obviously always increasing. Quantity of outputs down there on the horizontal axis, total cost is there on the vertical axis. Just so you have the formulas that I've just talked through, here they are for you. Now, for that marginal cost, I said it was that delta means change in total cost divided by change in quantity. Okay, you'll recall in Table 2, we always have a change of quantity of 1. And so if your quantity goes from 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, it's always changing by 1 cup of coffee in this case, and so you don't really have to worry about that part on the denominator. If the change in quantity is 1, it's just going to be that number divided by 1, or the change in total cost divided by 1. Okay, a couple of things to remember. Average fixed cost, remember, it was $3 all the way down. If we're going to be dividing it by quantity, it's always going to decrease as output rises. Average variable costs, though, they'll actually go down a little bit, and then it's going to come back up and make a U shape. So this one, if I were to show you and have you pick out and label an unlabeled graph. The one that's always going down is going to be average fixed cost. A U-shaped one, you're going to have to just see, it could be average variable cost or it could be average total cost. Average variable cost and average total cost have a U shape, and right there at the very, very bottom of the U is the definition of what efficient scale is. The quantity of output that minimizes average total cost. There's another thing that your author wants you to remember. There's a relationship between this U-shaped average total cost and marginal cost. All right, so when the marginal cost is below average total cost, it's going to pull the whole thing down. When it's above, average total cost is going to be pulled up. And let me show you what he's talking about there. Here's quantity of output. Here on the horizontal axis, we've got costs over here on the vertical axis. Okay, average total cost is going to look like that. If you go back to table 2, well, that's not a, you can see that it starts at 330 and then it hits a minimum of 130 and then it comes back up to 150. So for Conrad's coffee shop, it's going to look more like that, but it's U-shaped. This curve is always going to come back up. So average total cost. Marginal costs, and pay attention to the handout that we do in class, and you'll understand why, and look at those numbers as to why it has this shape. So marginal cost is going to come up through the middle. Quantity of output, so let's say that this is 10, that minimizes average total cost. That's called efficient scale. All right, so when marginal cost is lower than average total cost, think of this as your semester GPA. Think of this as your overall cumulative GPA. So if you're starting out with a 3.0 and this semester you don't do so well, you made all C's and your semester GPA was 2.0, what are you going to do to your 3.0? You're going to bring it down a little bit. So as long as this marginal cost is below average total cost, it's going to bring it down. They're going to intersect right where they're equal. I mean, if you've got a 3.0 GPA and you make a 3.0 this semester, it's going to stay the same. And that's where they're equal. But once you start making a 3.2, a 3.5, a 3.7, a 4.0, what are you going to do to your average GPA? You're going to start pulling it up. So that's what this slide is saying. When marginal cost is greater than average total cost, then average total cost is going to be rising. So they're graphing some sample data here. Usually that marginal cost curve looks a little bit more like a fish hook that goes up through the middle, but remember, average fixed cost is the one that's always going down. Average variable cost and average total cost look a little bit more like U-shapes. I'm going to go ahead and, okay, that just summarizes what I was saying, but figure 5, these are more typical cost curves. That figure 4 just shows the actual data that they were using for Conrad's coffee shop. So you see average total cost, average variable cost, they're more U-shaped. Okay, remember, total cost is equal to variable cost plus fixed cost, so that's why it's on top. And then marginal cost is kind of like a fish hook that goes up through the middle, intersects their minimum points of those two U's. So if I had these labels erased, make sure you would know which one goes with which and what we're talking about when we say fixed costs or variable costs or marginal costs, and make sure you know how to calculate them too. remember when I was talking about the short run, at least one variable is fixed, or a decision is fixed. Something's fixed, like the amount of equipment that you have, or the one stapler that the volunteers in class our activity had. Something's fixed. Everything's variable in the long run. MCC is thinking about maybe building some dorms and expanding. So that's long run, that's long-term planning. We're going to have to think about ways to fundraise and come up with money to finance those projects. But today, in the short run, we are fixed by the number of buildings that we have, and we have to plan out our course schedules and which classes we're going to offer to students with the buildings and classrooms that we have right now today. So if you see a question on the test about the short run being 6 months or a year, that is not right. That's not going to be correct, because it's just going to depend on company to company and industry to industry. What the defining thing is for the short run is at least one resource or variable is fixed. Can we expand in the long run? Sure. If we had the money to do so, we could do it tomorrow. If we need to find ways to finance our projects, it may be a year from now, 5 years from now. It just depends. So you can't constrain and define a short run and long run by length of time. Okay, figure 6 shows a series of average total costs in the short run. So these blue lines show that U-shaped average total cost curve. And the first one shows average total cost curve for a small factory. Okay, now remember here on the horizontal axis we're talking about cars. So if we build a bigger factory and we're able to produce more cars, we're going to look at this middle-shaped blue U, the average total cost in the short run with a medium-sized factory. And then for a larger factory, we're going to look at this third U. Now, if you take the tangents of all of these three blue U-shaped average total cost curves, remember they're in the short run, so that at least something is, one variable is fixed. But we're just looking in the case of a small, and if we were to expand the factory to medium-sized or large factory, those are the three different scenarios that we would have. But if you take the tangents of each one of those short run average total cost curves and come up with this big red average total cost curve. So this is in the long run. If we're not constrained by factory size, this is what our costs would look like. So this red curve looks like a big U, and the first part of the U where costs are average total costs are going down, we call those economies of scale. Okay, why do we ask Double R to cater an event? Why do we ask Uncle Dan's to cater an event? Because it is cheaper for a big restaurant to cook 100 or 200 meals or have enough food for 200 people rather than you making burgers out of your own kitchen. They've got the staff to do it, they've got the machinery, they've got a big kitchen to do it. When you expand your restaurant or business factory, you're going to see some economies of scale, and it's going to be cheaper. You're going to see costs start to go down as you make more and more product. But then, at some point, maybe with a medium-sized factory, you're going to see constant returns to scale. You're not saving any more money on costs anymore. And then at some point, if you get too big, what is going to happen with your long-run average total cost curve? It's starting to go back up. At the end of the U, you're going to see diseconomies of scale. So, is it possible for a company to be too big? Are we going to see costs start to go back up? And the answer is yes. I shared an example in class with the Ford Motor Company. Henry Ford built a huge factory along a river. He had lots and lots of little factories. He was making Model T cars, but then he decided he was going to make the Model A and this big, huge industrial-sized plant. And it just took thousands and thousands of mops and brooms and cleaning supplies just to maintain this factory. And he actually lost money on the Model A's that he was selling because of the cost of operating and keeping up this facility. You know, he couldn't sell it for more because then people would just not buy it. They would buy the Model T. So is it possible for a plant to be too big and have costs start to go up? Definitely. Okay, remember, economies of scale, diseconomies of scale, these are long-run concepts. We're not constrained by factory size anymore, not constrained by the amount of machinery and equipment. So we can grow as big as we want. We're not constrained by anything anymore. So whenever these are long-run concepts. So we've got the definitions here. When you've got specialization and costs start to fall, as you get bigger, that's economies of scale. But then diseconomies of scale is when you've already realized those benefits of specialization. We've got a really, really large organization. They're less effective at keeping costs down, maybe less effective managers. We've got coordination problems. Different departments don't know what other departments are doing, so then we start to see costs go up. So bigger doesn't necessarily always mean better after a certain point. So this last slide here might help you to have the definition and then also the formula. Again, these are not going to be provided for you on the test, so make sure that you know these. And that is the end of Chapter 13.